Going to be showing you how to make arrows according to a number of various designs. So I've actually got two types of foaming in these arrowheads. This is made from camping mat foam. This is made from pool noodle. The video will explain the difference in the making of those depending on the materials you have available to you. Then also I have two types of fletching visible over here. So this is made out of cardboard and duct tape. This is some store-bought or broken arrow salvage fletching. You'll also notice that these are 10mm dowels. I'm just going to quickly grab another arrow and show you something. And you'll notice this arrow has got a slightly different knock, and that is because it is an 8mm dowel. Alright, and so pretty much I'll be showing you how to make one of these long-range killers. Alright. Okay, so first thing I'm just going to show you is how to put the nocks on your arrows. So I've got two dowels here, an 8mm one and a 10mm one. I'm going to show you how to knock the 8mm first. Now for your 8mm dowels, you're going to have to get store-bought nocks, and store-bought nocks won't work on 10mm dowels. And basically what you do is you take that 8mm dowel, standard sharpener, scratch the back off over there, so it gives a nice little neat pokey, and you are going to glue that little orange knock on. Now just to point out, as I said, most standard arrows that are store-bought come in about an 8mm diameter. Now for Dahoga arrows, if you're going the cheap route and making your own arrows, and not buying that lovely like fiberglass or aluminium type arrows, don't get 8mm dowels. This is just if you have nocks lying around and you don't want to hand saw the nocks at the back. The reason being, these arrows get stepped on, these arrows get lost in the bush, these arrows go through hell, these arrows are not very cared for. They're Dahoga battle arrows. And if you want them to last, 8mm dowel is going to break much faster than a 10mm dowel. But anyway, back to this case, if you have store-bought nocks, just lick your fingers or dip them in water a bit, and once you've applied that hot glue, you just smooth that down. Any other glue really does the trick, as long as it's sticky and dries. And there we go, that's how you knock an 8mm dowel. Now this is the knocking method I prefer, and that is hand sawing the knock for an arrow. It takes a little bit longer, takes a little bit of dexterity, you know, that type of stuff. And I basically use a combination of the metal saw and a little craft knife I've got, and the trick is to carve that knock down to a point that you can get it onto a bowstring. Good way to test this, have a bow at hand that you can just like quickly knock that. If you want to make a quick little bowstring, also plaiting nylon string does the job. But anyway, I was lucky I had a bowstring lying around. And as soon as I'm happy with the knock fitting onto that bowstring, then it's done. You don't want it to be too tight, or else the arrow's going to break, and if it's too loose, it's going to be a little bit more difficult to shoot accurately, and then there we go, and that is exactly what you want from a knock. Okay, now just a little bit of a tip. I like to oil my dowels. I also like to coat my dowels in a layer of wax after I've oiled them. It just means they live a little bit longer, because as I said, these arrows go through hell, but if they're a little bit tougher, and if they're waterproof, and if they get lost in the felt and found a year later, and you don't want to abandon the wood. So I add a liberal layer of linseed oil and wax on the exterior of all my arrows. I find it increases how long they live, and it prevents them from breaking too easily. You don't have to do that though, just a tip. Now, making the fletching. Fletching is a little bit tricky, especially if you don't have a fletching rig, and if you're not into like traditional trad archery and you don't have your own fletching rig. This is a quick and easy way to do it. It's not as mathematically accurate, but it does the job. You take a little bit of a string, white to be preferenced. You wrap it around your dowel just to get that circumference, and you divide that circumference by 3, because that would be where you're placing those 3 fletches. So there, I think for this one it was about a 4 centimeter circumference, and I marked off 1.3 centimeters just to get those thirds over there. Then what I do is I measure 3 fingers up so that's about 4 or 5 centimeters up from the base of the arrow, or the nock of the arrow, and I plan where my fletching is going to go. Just some standard archery practice is you want your one fletch to face perpendicularly away from the bowstring, so it doesn't knock the arrow off course when you shoot it. As I said, this is not a perfect science, it's not even really a perfect art, but it'll give you slightly more accurate fletching. Also, another thing I do, I like to twist my fletching a bit, so it's not going in a straight line up the arrow, it's twisted a little bit. If you are using leftover feathers, just bearing in mind if it's a right or a left wing, you don't want to twist your fletch in the opposite direction that a feathered fletch is going to have the air go over it. But don't worry about that with this rubber fletching. Then I use hot glue. Hot glue is the easiest, is the cheapest. There's other glues, they're a bloody mission, or they're expensive. Just use hot glue. You run it along the dowel, it's going to melt the wax that I've put on that dowel. So cold glues won't melt that wax. And then after I've done that line of hot glue before adding the fletching, then I add the fletching and I do another line of hot glue on the one side of the fletch, lick my finger or dip it in water depending on how civilized I'm feeling, and I run that glue along the arrow. It's not the prettiest looking, but it keeps the fletch on the damn arrow. As I said, these arrows go through hell and back. You want that fletching to be nice and tough because they're gonna get abused. Anyway, so once I've done that, the final touch I do is a little bit of duct tape around the front of the fletching just to double secure them. Then, okay, this is the other method I like. I actually prefer how this method looks. And it's really cheap. You just like grab a cereal box, do some standard fletching, and then you're going to take your fletch, you're going to lay it gently onto a piece of duct tape, and then you're going to get another piece of duct tape, and you're going to gently layer it over that cardboard cutout of fletching. Now the only trick is, the tricksy bit, don't let the duct tape touch each other along the bottom bit, because that's going to be counterproductive. So I spent a fiddly amount of time making sure that it didn't touch along the bottom bit, because that is where I'm going to gently wrap it around the dowel. And that was also a little bit fiddly, but I do like how this turned out compared to second-hand scrap pieces of fletching found from broken arrows. And I press that down nice and firmly. You want that duct tape to really stick to itself. It makes that arrow waterproof, or the fletching waterproof, and it lasts a little bit longer. Then what I do is I'll take a knife and I'll very carefully cut around the edge of the cardboard, or the card. Don't cut the actual card, because that means it's exposed to the elements. That means moisture is going to get in there. That means your fletching is going to break apart sooner than it should. Just go a little bit outside there, whilst where the duct tape is still nicely sticking to itself. Cool, and voila, there's a sexy little arrow, nice and green, so we see it in the felt. Yeah, I know it's Lumo green, I know that's not historical in the slightest. I don't like losing my arrows, but anyway, that's besides the point. Okay, so let me quickly skim through that. There we go, my fletching is done and made. And just as a final touch, what I'll do after cutting out that various fletch is I'll do a little strip of duct tape along the base of the fletching and along the top of the fletching, just to neatly and additionally secure it. And this should last a long time. Now, the only criticism I have with this particular fletching, it's wider than I'd normally do it, which means it's going to be a slightly more drag on this arrow. It's going to be a slightly slower arrow, but you know, it's got a big poofy padding thing on the front. How much slower can you make an arrow? I was quite happy with it. Now anyway, so now let's jump to the padding bit. Please pay attention here, this is really important. You stuff up the padding and people get hurt. So 3 fingers above and 2 fingers below. So your 2 fingers below are going to be what's going to be glued to the dowel, and the 3 fingers above is going to be the padding space between your dowel and your unfortunate victims. Now what you want to do, it doesn't matter what width of foam you're using, or thickness of foam. In this case it's 1mm camping mat foam, so long as you end up with a 2 centimeter thickness away from the dowel. And you see I measured that there, and then I cut the weight. Look, you can go overkill with padding around your dowel, but it's going to slow down your arrow. It's going to be like, hey, watch me dodge this. With the Dahoga arrows, there's a delicate balance of actually making it, you know, hit anything and safe enough to hit anything. And then I just neaten that up a little bit. And now in this case, I use contact adhesive. I use a lot of contact adhesive to stick that foam to itself and that foam to the arrow as much as physically possible. Because what happens is if you don't do this properly, that dowel stick's going to eat through the foam or wiggle its way through the foam. And you end up with a sneaky little dowel stick that pokes people when you shoot them with it. And you won't be able to see the arrow doing that unless you take it apart. People get hurt, it sucks. Sorry Tosha, sorry Bruce. So padding your arrows is really, really important. And you see that little X spot over there is the only bit of the padding that I'm not putting glue on. Also another tip, don't work on a newly freshly oiled table. It reduces the quality of the glue. And I had to re-glue them twice. Long story short, shiny table doesn't necessarily mean nice glue. So anyway, so I glue the crick bats out of that dowel stick, nice and sticky icky, put that to the side for 10 minutes. And as soon as I have, what I'll do is I glue that foam up a little bit and wait 10 minutes and it sticks to itself very, very nicely. Roll that up nice and tight, get it nice and tight. With a good amount of duct tape. Once again, you want that duct tape to be nice and firm and tight, especially around the base of your arrow. It's just an additional layer of protection to make sure that that dowel never sneaks up through the padding. I take that quite seriously, but once again, don't go overkill with the duct tape because then it makes it fat slower. Okay, now this is how we do it with pool noodle. A little bit cheaper, a little bit clumpier. So you take your hollow pool noodle, you cut in quarters, and you cut the 1/4 into eighths, and then you make a little rectangular cube thingy for the tip. And basically, is your arrow will go there, the top and the bottom is over there, the left and the right is over there. You get it. You can also do an additional bit of foam at the tip. Anyway, so once you've glued that up and you've stuck it together, you see the basic shape over there. Once again, go overkill with the duct tape. The duct tape is an extra layer of safety that is going to be protecting your arrow. And there is the finishing touch, and those were my deadly pretties over there. Yeah, have fun, dudes.